We are studying Acts 7, and we are getting very close to the end. I apparently got so excited about studying Acts 7, I tore a page in my Bible, so that's not good. So I'm going to be getting some tape and taping that. It was like, whoa, no way, and just tore it. Don't recommend it. Don't recommend it. There's a forever bookmark there. So we're in Acts chapter 7. We're studying this message that Stephen brought. Now, Stephen is in front of the Jewish religious leadership of the day, and they're accusing him of preaching this Jesus, who they don't like. And obviously, we know they don't like him because they crucified him just a few years before. Now, they thought that that was the end of it. However, it wasn't. We know that Jesus rose from the dead, is now sitting at the right hand of the Father, and has conquered death, who, of course, is our hope today. And so this movement is continuing on, and has led a lot of people away from the synagogues and away from a dependence upon these Pharisees and these religious leaders of the day. Typically with less dependence, fewer people, less attendance, less interest comes less fundage. And so that's probably hitting them in the pocketbook. The fact that there were people not attending, not coming to services, clearly not assigning their loyalty to these Pharisees, to these religious leaders, this religious political party. And so we see them now trying to stamp out this way. We see this in Acts chapter 4, where Peter and John are brought before these religious leaders, and they're sternly warned. Has anyone ever written a sternly written letter? Like, I'd yell at you, but I'd rather write you a stern letter. Okay, waste, chuck it. That's what this was. It was a stern warning to stop preaching this Jesus. And what's happening? What do we see happening? It's growing. We talked about campfire, trying to stamp out a campfire and seeing the embers fly, and it's starting to spread. And so now they've brought someone who's one of the chosen leaders in Acts chapter 6, which is Stephen. And they've brought him before the council, and they've said, all right, what do you have to say for yourself? And we talked about at the end of chapter 6 where it says, they looked upon Stephen and they saw his face as the face of an angel. So he was looking a little different. At that point, I'd be out. You guys got this. All right, boys, I'm out on this one. Okay. We talked about the guard who had his ear removed by the Apostle Peter and a knife. If the guy I'm here to arrest picked up my ear and put it back on my head, I'd probably be like, okay, guys, it's all you. All right. That's what I would be thinking as I'm seeing Stephen. Stephen's going to walk through the Israeli history, this Jewish history with them. They know all this, but what's he doing? What's our theme? What is he bringing them to? He's bringing them to Jesus Christ. He is combining their history that they know, and he's collecting it all together. Here's all this stuff that God's been doing over time, and it's all to point to the one that you crucified. Okay? So that's where we're at. That's a quick catch-up. He's talked about Abraham. He's talked about Moses. He's going to finish up here toward the end. We are getting toward the end. As we talked about, he is minutes away from dying. And yet he is standing strong in the face of this leadership. And he's telling them exactly what the Spirit is moving him to say, and which is being bold in his witness. I think about our brethren who died for 1,200 years at 120 a day. I think about our forefathers who had to stand in the face of their accusers and executors. And I know that they drew upon the story of Stephen for strength. And this is someone that we can look to as a hero in the work. Our fathers had the tabernacle of witness in the wilderness as he appointed. instructing Moses to make it according to the pattern that he had seen, which our fathers, having received it in turn, also brought with Joshua into the land possessed by the Gentiles, whom God drove out before the face of our fathers until the days of David, who found favor before God and asked to find a dwelling for the God of Jacob. Now, Stephen is covering hundreds of years here, and then, I have watched many American history and world history documentaries in my day. I'm very nerdy when it comes to history, and I love it. And oftentimes an episode could be hundreds of years. That's what Stephen is doing. He's progressing from Moses to what Joshua did, to what David did, recalling what the promise to Jacob was. So let's take a look at this. I cannot see from back here, so I will be up here. Stephen's defense continued to unravel the charges against him. He has soared through many years of history and brought their minds from the worship of idols to the tabernacle. He took them from the wilderness journey to the settling of the promised land. If you, as we continue, you know me well after 7 months, you will hear me say, and we will study at some point, the man Joshua. He is one of my all-time favorite characters in the entire Bible. I absolutely love his stand for the Lord, his leadership, his example, his standing up with only one other person to face 2 million people and say, God can handle this. God can take us into this promised land. And he stood up against 2 million people and 10 other people who went with him. And he was alone, except for Caleb. He was alone in his desire to do this and his confidence in God. And so Joshua is one of my favorites. Like I said, we'll study that book at some point. He told them that their fathers had the tabernacle of witness in the wilderness, leaving them no reason for the worship of false gods. This gradual progression in Stephen's defense was leading his listeners and accusers to the condition of their hearts, which was the rejection of their Savior, Jesus Christ. Now, he's going to tell them, you have no excuse. He was right here. He stood here. He healed people. He clearly had authority, and they knew that. We see that in John 3. We see a Pharisee, a religious leader, coming to him at night and saying, we know who you are. We know you're someone. And so we see that interaction happening quite often where they knew who he was. They just didn't want to admit it. Moses fashioned the tabernacle of witness like the one he had seen in the vision God gave him. It stood as God's protection, God's power and presence, and was the place where true worship was instituted and accepted. This first sanctuary was one of impermanence. The Hebrews took it down and put it up, always moving from one place to another. Everywhere they moved the tabernacle. From the crossing of the Jordan to the conquest of the land, they moved it with them, signifying the presence of God with them. Even in the promised land, the tabernacle had no permanent place until David had secured Jerusalem. These verses take into consideration the settling of the land, including the wars to take possession of the land. Now, we're going to visit the battles and combatants of the land as Israel came in and conquered those lands. We're going to talk about them. We're going to talk about it a little bit. Hopefully tonight, Lord willing. We're certainly going to start it a week from Sunday. And we're going to talk about these people who were pushed out of this land because God had promised it to Israel. Later, God fixed the establishment of the throne of David after the demise of Saul. So, under David's leadership, the nation would become stronger and had supposedly settled permanently in the land for which they longed. Joshua, the judges, Saul, now David. Okay? And David has this desire to build this house for God, this sanctuary. In verse 46, Stephen says that David found favor before God. God greatly blessed David with prosperity and protection, and in the Psalms was known as the man seeking the heart of God. David desired to build an oikon or a house. He desired to build that. Though David did not build this house for God, no one can deny the greatness of the throne of David. Why is the throne of David important? Why does his legacy continue? What's that? It's where Jesus will reign. Jesus will sit on the throne of David. And so David's throne is of importance. And so David is of importance. Now, this goes to show what God can do. David was an adulterer and a murderer. And yet Jesus is going to sit on his throne. That's grace. That's mercy. That's how God works. Okay? And so that's why we see so important this throne of David. God made a covenant promise to establish his throne forever, and upon his throne, the Son of God would rule and reign forever. Both the tabernacle and the greatness of the throne of David, God's greatness, love, and protection for his covenant people. So we see both, not only the tabernacle, but the greatness of the throne of David. We are shown God's greatness, God's love, and God's protection for his covenant people. Okay. Next, chapter 7, verse 47. However, Solomon built him a house. However, the Most High does not dwell in temples made with hands, as the prophet says. Heaven is my throne, earth is my footstool. What house will you build for me, says the Lord? Or what is the place of my rest? Has my hand not made all these things? So now Stephen's going to quote some scripture. He's quoting scripture in which he is talking to a group of people who, as we know from their interaction with Jesus, put very high importance on the temple and the intricacies of the temple. So we're going to take a look at that. We're going to take a look at this temple, not only the one Solomon built, but the one that these people worshiped in. Okay, in due time, Solomon, David's son, did build the temple in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where God had appeared to David in 2 Chronicles 3:1, which says, Now Solomon began to build the house of the Lord at Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where the Lord had appeared to his father David. Okay. His first temple was one of beauty and magnitude. It was arrayed with costly gold and silver, material that David had collected. Now, God made it clear to David, you are pretty bloody. You've killed a lot. As much as I appreciate your fervor, desire, zeal to build me a house, it's going to be your son. It's going to be your son Solomon, who, remember, is the son of the woman that he had her husband killed. So you put all that together, and again, we see God's grace through all of this. We see his grace, that he works with people, and people are flawed. And yet we still see God working with people to accomplish his plan. So David collected the materials. The Bible says David collected 100,000 talents of gold, which is equal to approximately 3,000 tons. So I did a little math. I'm really good at math. Katie, you're good at math, right? Great. Okay, well, no help on this one. So I did a little math. Jojo, you ready for some math? Here's a breakdown. Gold today is worth $2,306.25 per ounce. Okay? That is based on a Google search yesterday. That's how fresh this data is. Now, has it gone up or has it gone down since yesterday? I don't know. It doesn't matter. For math purposes, we're going with this number because the rest of the slide is all math. There are 16 ounces in a pound. How many people knew that? I had to look that up. Thank you, Katie. Good job. I had to look that up. There are 16 ounces in 1 pound. For each pound, gold is worth $36,900. Now, what does it say? How much did he use? Well, it says, which means he used 6 million pounds of gold. So how much is the gold from the temple worth today? Using some very basic math and my free Windows calculator. Today's value is $221.4 billion. And that's just the gold. I think that's how much we've sent to Ukraine. So that stinks. So $221 billion in gold. Okay. How about the silver? Silver's a little bit less. It's worth $27.64, or about $442 per pound. Okay, a little less. Silver we might be able to afford. All right, gold's a little spendy. Silver we can buy. We're going to buy a bunch of silver. We're going to buy 1 ounce of silver. $27. Solomon used 30 tons, 60 million pounds of silver. See that in 1 Chronicles. So, how about some math? $26.5 billion just for the silver. So this is $250 billion building, if you put it together. Okay? Solomon gathered even more material, and he urged the Hebrews to join in this vast undertaking, calling even on the skills of foreigners to do some of the tasks. He wanted to build a place of worship for God. And he's not messing around. $250 billion building. By comparison, for those who have been to SoFi Stadium, the Rams Stadium, that was a $5 billion stadium, and that thing is massive. So there's no gold in there, no. They have silver from a trophy, but that's about it. You're welcome. But other than that, yeah, there's no gold. And it certainly wasn't $250 billion. So that's what we see. The influence of this temple of renown continues even to today. The temple was later destroyed by Babylon, who carried the Hebrews into captivity. We're going to see this in the book of Daniel. Upon their return, a second advent of this temple was built in Ezra chapter 3. We see that here. When the builders laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, the priests stood in their apparel with trumpets, and the Levites, the sons of Asaph, with cymbals to praise the Lord according to the ordinance of David, king of Israel. And they sang responsively, praising and giving thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endures forever toward Israel. All the people shouted with a great shout when they praised the Lord, because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. Now, for those who remember, on October 1st, it was our first Sunday here. It was my first message as your pastor. And this was the first message. So this was about building a foundation here, certainly for us. And so this was something that they rejoiced over. Many of the priests and Levites and the heads of the fathers' houses, old men who had seen the first temple, wept with a loud voice when the foundation of this temple was laid before their eyes. Yet many shouted aloud for joy, so that the people could not discern the noise of the shout of joy from the noise of the weeping of the people. For the people shouted with a loud shout, and the sound was heard afar off. What a beautiful picture of praise. Older people who had seen the first temple and how incredible that was. The Babylonians came in and just destroyed it, picked it apart like a chicken. Like a cooked chicken, not an actual live chicken, because that's creepy. But they picked it apart, took the gold, took the silver, and here, this is just the foundation, that there was this much cheer, as if, hey, God is back. But keep something in mind, and we're going to study this a little bit. Keep something in mind, especially as you consume news however you consume it. God is with Israel. God is with Israel. We're told to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Okay, God is with Israel. And so even in captivity with Babylon, God was with Israel. So they're thankful for this moment, but it's also a reflection of God protecting them that entire time to bring them back. And so that's what we see. Imagine their cry and happiness when this comes back. We're going to study that. This was the temple that was there during Stephen's message. So that Ezra 3 temple is the one that's there. This is the second temple. Okay, this is the one that was there during Stephen's message. Only decades later, this temple would be destroyed and not to be rebuilt until a time yet future to us now. Is there a desire to rebuild this temple again for a third time? So now we're talking about the temple being destroyed in the first century by the Romans. And so now my goodness, there can't be a desire for another temple to be rebuilt, because after 2 times now, we've seen it get pillaged and destroyed. Well, there is. And so let's preview this from our forthcoming studies in Daniel. So I have pulled some slides from our future study in the book of Daniel. And so when we go through this again, I believe it's in Daniel 8 or 9, you'll see these again. But these are the slides from that lesson. So here is what we're seeing. One of the major pieces to fall into place during this last time period is the rebuilding of the temple for the 3rd time in Jerusalem. This 3rd temple plays a big role in the last days, as it is the place where Jewish service is restored and the Antichrist walks into and declares to be God and demands worship. Now, how many people know this? Is this something that we know? Temple is rebuilt. The Antichrist allows the temple to get rebuilt. We're going to look at that. The Antichrist then at some point walks into this rebuilt temple and says he's God and demands to be worshiped. Okay? So as we look at this, think of that and think of this movement. Also, think of our news feed. Think of what we're seeing today. Okay? Poor kid. His name's Zion, and there are people not allowed to go to class on college campuses because they want to be a part of the Zionist movement. Okay? Well, what does that mean? Well, we're going to look at that. She's fine. She's a nice kid. You'll like her. And she can go to class just fine. But there are people blocking classrooms and access to colleges and asking these kids, are you for or against the Zionist movement? Okay? And so, no regrets, by the way. Where is the rebuild project lately, and how will it get built with the Al-Aqsa Mosque sitting on the very spot that the Temple Mount is? Well, let's look at the history of this movement and where it currently stands. So this is the area. This is what it looks like. Okay, it is sort of up on a hill. It's known as the Temple Mount. What stands out, at least it has for me over the years of studying this, what stands out for me is this Dome of the Rock. Probably because when you're looking at otherwise sort of bland buildings, this gold dome just pops, especially when it's sunny out. It just sort of stands out. Well, that pops pretty well. So here is the Western Wall. Again, they believe that is the only wall remaining from the temple, this second temple that was built. Okay? Here's the Jewish quarter. Here's the old city of Jerusalem. Huge Muslim area. And then there is this mosque right there, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And there is just sort of a drawing rendition of it. Again, you can kind of see it. We're going to come back to this. No, Hagen, that is not the Golden Gate in San Francisco. This is in Jerusalem. Okay, just making sure. In 1967, Israel gained control over the Temple Mount, Haram Ash-Sharif compound, during the 6-Day War, inspiring messianic fervor amongst religious Jews. So where have we been with this? Well, Israel really, when Nebuchadnezzar took Israel away, remember the nation had split into 2 parts. Israel in the north, Judah in the south. Okay? Assyria had taken Israel away. They had taken them captive. They were gone. Judah was still around. God allows Nebuchadnezzar, we should know that name. We'll study him in Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar and his nation of Babylon, they took Israel away. Or they took Judah away. So now all of God's covenant people are under captivity. 70 years later, they're allowed to come back. The Medes and Persians have taken over. They've partnered and they've taken over Babylon. Okay? So they've taken them over. They're now gathering. They said, Israel, the Jewish people, you can come back. But really, since Babylon until 1948, there was no Jewish state, Jewish nation. Okay? And so in 1948, no doubt, with sympathy from World War II and what had happened there, a Jewish state was created and incorporated in 1948. So for all of that time, from the time of Nebuchadnezzar, really to 1948, Israel was a nation within a nation. So they had to be under Mede and Persian rule. Then the Medes and Persians lose to Greece. Greece is led by a gentleman named Alexander the Great. He comes in and takes over and makes Israel subjected to him and to the nation of Greece, the kingdom of Greece, the country of Greece. Greece gets taken over by Rome and the Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire comes in, takes over Greece, expands the empire, it gets bigger, they take over more land, and all of that. So now Israel is really under Roman rule. Enter Christ. This is the time period that Christ enters in, where Israel is really under Roman rule. And we see that with his crucifixion. They can't do anything unless they get Rome's approval. Okay, so they have to put him in front of, Herod just can't make, yeah, we should kill this guy. They have to go in front of Pontius Pilate. Okay, so Romans really were over the area. So the Jews eventually scatter from that area. We're going to study this because a new movement in the 7th century rises up and starts to take over that land. Then the Catholics and the Arabs, they start fighting and the Jews are dispersed. Well, now a lot of them land in Europe, where there's a guy who rises up after World War I and says, I need to take over this country that lost, this country of Germany, and we're going to blame the Jewish people for all the ills of the world. Okay? So his name was Adolf Hitler. And he came in and took over Europe, really conquered Europe, corralled many of the Jews, and of course, as we know, slaughtered 6 million of them plus. Okay? Have you heard of concentration camps and gas chambers and some of these things that we hear from World War II that happened? After that, there really is a sympathetic movement to create a state for the Jewish people once again, where Israel is once again a nation. And so the UN creates sort of an edict where they say, okay, we're going to create a Jewish state. We're going to give them Jerusalem. We're going to give them Gaza. We're going to give them all this area. That's the Jewish state. The day they were incorporated in 1948, I believe it was 8 or 10 Arab nations around them were on the border ready to annihilate them. That was in 1948. So what's different in 2024? Well, when they talk about from the river to the sea, guess what area of land is from the river to the sea? Israel. And so their desire is to completely wipe that area clean of Jews and take it over and give it back to, at this point, they're not Arab people, they're Muslim people, and put them back in charge of everywhere that Israel is. That includes the Temple Mount, because they've already got a mosque there. We're going to study that on Sundays. We're going to find out why. There's a mosque there. And there's this dome there, and why it's the third holiest site in Islam. We're going to study that. Okay? So for now, this is 19 years after all of that. We see a 6-day war happening, and we see this Temple Mount being gained back by the Jews. All right, let's keep going. Questions on that? That was a lot of history. Talk about covering a lot of time in a short amount. Does everyone, you probably heard some names you've recognized. Alexander the Great, Adolf Hitler. Those are names we just know from secular history. They all relate to God's people. Isn't that fantastic? That shows God's plan throughout all of this. Alexander the Great is actually talked about in the book of Daniel long before he was alive. And so we're going to look at all of that because secular history meets God's forecast and God's plan, and it comes together beautifully. Okay? So in 1974, Gush Uminim, or a Block of the Faithful, a right-wing messianic organization, was founded to encourage religiously motivated Jewish settlement in the West Bank, Gaza, and the Golan Heights. Okay? Now we have our country back. The call has gone out to Jews all over the world. Come back. We have our land. Come back. We have Jerusalem. We have the Temple Mount. We have a wall. Has anyone ever seen the Wailing Wall? People pray at this and they stick prayers in there. They stick notes in there. Tall people have a little higher access. Shorter people have a little lower access. But there's these cracks in the wall where people pray. They put their hand on it. And it's this emotional feel because there is this desire to bring back not just the temple itself, but the way of worship. That's your Zionist movement. To bring back the tribes, bring back the feasts, bring back all of that. Okay, 74. 1984, a good year. The Jewish underground attempted to blow up the Dome of the Rock in order to initiate the rebuilding of a Jewish temple on the Temple Mount. Oh, that's a bad idea. Okay, don't do that. Because we see what happens, okay? When certain people who own certain things get poked, bad idea, okay? And that's what we see. 1987, the Temple Institute was founded as a non-violent educational organization dedicated to building the Third Temple. In October of 90, the Third Temple movement announced that it would lay the cornerstone of the Third Temple, leading to riots on the Temple Mount. Now, who do you think is rioting? Not the Jews. They're excited. They want to bring back this temple. The people who own the other 70% of the area. It's crazy to me that all this battle is for this small area. Just like Gaza. It's really a small area. It's not real big. But there's battles over this. How many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people have lost their lives because of this land? Man, go take over like Nigeria. Like go somewhere else. But this is holy. This is holy land. And so both sides feel that way. And so that's what we see. So they wanted to lay the cornerstone in October of 90. Also in the 90s, Rabbi Shlomo Guren, the former chief Ashkenazi rabbi of Israel, began to promote Jewish pilgrimage and prayer at the Temple Mount. Okay, so we see an increase in that in the 90s. In 99, the Temple Institute finished the construction of a $1 million golden candelabra for the future Third Temple. Now, does anyone remember what that looks like? Well, let's take a look. There it is. On display. Ready to go. Ready to go. In 99, they probably thought the world was coming to an end. So if we're going to do it, let's get it done, right? How many other people thought the world was coming to an end in 99? I know my dad did. He freaked out and started running to his computer to see if smoke would start coming out and start freaking out. Oh my goodness, the internet! You know, and it was fine, just so you know. And everyone was good. Even in Montana, where the little hamster just kept running for the internet. It just kept running on the little wheel. Everything was fine. September of 2000, Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon visited the Temple Mount, provoking the Second Intifada. So the Prime Minister now is acknowledging this area, acknowledging the wall. Of course, huge to do, lots of press, lots of coverage for Prime Minister of Israel to go. Women of the Temple was founded, 2004. The nascent Sanhedrin was officially established, which is a rabbinic Supreme Court, which temple activists believe will rule over Israel when the Third Temple is rebuilt. 2010s, the Temple Institute and its partner groups began organizing Third Temple practice rituals for the general public, where Jewish priests practice animal sacrifices and rituals in preparation for the Third Temple. Okay. 2011, increasing numbers of religious Jews began entering the Temple Mount or the Haram Ash-Sharif on guided pilgrimage tours. Again, there's something about, for them, and maybe for us too. I've never been over there. Has anyone ever been to Israel? Has anyone ever been to the Temple Mount? Has anyone ever been to the Wailing Wall? No? There's something about the tactile part of it, that this is really from the time, 2,000 plus years before. There's something there. There's a connection there with wanting to rebuild this temple. 2012, the Temple Institute moved to its current prominent location across from the Western Wall, where it displays reconstructed temple vessels. 2012, the first Passover animal sacrifice reenactment took place in Jerusalem. 2013, Third Temple activist Yehuda Glick carried out a hunger strike when police banned him from entering the Temple Mount. 2013, following the example of Glick, Third Temple activists began to speak about Jewish access to the Temple Mount as a matter of religious freedom and human rights. Again, not that big of a deal if nobody else cared about it. But when you believe your holy prophet ascended to heaven alive from that same area, now we have a problem, because you've got two conflicting religions who they're not just, we should agree to disagree. No, they hate each other. Okay? And so because of that, we're seeing this conflict over this area. Okay, October 2014, Third Temple activist Glick survived an assassination attempt on his life. 2015, in the fall during the Jewish high holidays, large numbers of religious Jews entered the Temple Mount with leading activists of the Third Temple movement, further inflaming tensions with Palestinians. 2016, in April, Third Temple activists were arrested for attempting to bring live animal sacrifices to the Temple Mount for the Passover holiday. Why is that a big deal, right? They should be able to do freedom of religion. Yeah, not over there. You're not going to put your Jewish sacrifices for your Jewish holiday on what's our area. It isn't as tensions continue to rise, it isn't you do your thing over there, we'll do our thing over here. There's no agreement to that. And that's why I believe one person will come in and make the pact for both, okay? Because there is such hatred for each of them against these guys. Okay. November of 2016, ministers from Likud and Jewish home parties announced the establishment of a new temple lobby dedicated to advancing the issue of Jewish visitation and prayer on the Temple Mount. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that was actually the day before Trump was elected. And Trump is very pro-Israel, was a very pro-Israel president, created something called the Abraham Accords, and actually moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem because of the importance of Jerusalem to him. The Third Temple movement is a messianic movement dedicated to the building of the third Jewish temple on the Temple Mount Haram Ash-Sharif compound, the renewal of a Jewish priesthood, and the reestablishment of a theocratic Jewish kingdom in Israel. Now, Israel exists as a nation. The Zionist movement is getting back to these feasts, which includes the sacrifices, which includes the instruments, which includes the temple. So you can institute all these things all you want. You've got to have a place to do it. And that's what we're looking for. This movement remains a highly contentious and politically provocative movement in the Middle East, often credited with playing a role in sustaining cycles on violence on the ground in Israel and Palestine. For Jews, the Temple Mount is believed to be the site of the first and second Jewish temples, a juridical and spiritual center where ancient Israelites offered animal sacrifices to God. According to Jewish prophecy, a third temple will be rebuilt on the Temple Mount when the Jewish exiles return to the land of Israel, initiating a new messianic era. Now, for Muslims, the Haram Ash-Sharif compound is the home of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and is considered the third holiest site in Islam. Now, we're going to study more of this on Sunday afternoons. Little plug for Sunday afternoons in a week and a half. We're going to study why this is a holy site for them. It is believed to be the place where the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven. Okay, well, I just ruined it. So now you don't have to come on Sunday afternoons. I just ruined it. So there it is. That's what you need to know. That's why it's the third holiest site. You've heard of Mecca, right? You've heard of the importance of Mecca, people making the journey to Mecca. We're going to study that and why that's important, why that will play a part in prophecy, and obviously the Temple Mount will as well. Since the British Mandate times, the Haram Ash-Sharif has been an important site and symbol of Palestinian autonomy and resistance to Zionism and the Zionist movement. Okay, so I saw a video just the other day where at a college campus, I believe it's in Westwood, had an area blocked off and Palestinian flags flying high, and a Jewish student, who I'm pretty sure UCLA is an expensive college, I don't know, probably, was trying to get to the library to study for finals. And he's trying to get in, and the question that he kept getting asked was, are you a Zionist? Are you for the Zionist movement? Because like with any movement, there are Jewish apologists who are Muslim. And there are Muslim apologists who are Jewish. There's a few. The numbers obviously are small, but they exist. What Islam doesn't like is the Zionist movement. The Zionist movement is to reestablish order and to take over this area. Now that's why I think there was genius early on in establishing the Jewish holy site as an Islamic holy site as well, thus creating centuries of chaos and fighting. Okay? And so that's what we see. So the question that kept getting asked, are you a Zionist? Do you want the Zionist movement? Are you for this? Are you a Zionist? And his response was, yeah. They didn't let him in. And so we see this movement growing fervor, even to today. In addition to its religious and political significance, Haram Ash-Sharif is an important site for educational activities and the charitable work within the Muslim Palestinian community. For Palestinians and Muslims worldwide, the growing Third Temple movement represents a direct threat to the Islamic nature of this holy site and an obstacle to establishing a just peace for the region. Meaning that is something they're not going to concede to. It's going to take a miracle to concede to have this temple rebuilt. Okay? So how is this going to happen? There's such animosity over this area of land that it seems impossible to imagine a Jewish temple in the place of a mosque that has such significance. How good is the Antichrist going to be to broker a deal to allow this? The animosity still exists, and this is the current climate here and over there. And we're seeing this as recently as within the last, how long has it happened? Since they attacked on October 7th, we see an increased fervor in this. Which, what does that mean? If our enemies are going to attack, then we're going to dig our heels in. And you know what? We want it even more now. How about that? We want it even more. And we're going to dig in our heels because you're attacking us. And so there's this movement that's there to rebuild this temple. And so these are ripped from the headlines, including even trying to concede that, hey, if we build a temple, we'll make it for all people. Okay? So, seeing more and more of this. So, these are some quotes in a prominent Islamic teacher, a prominent preacher at the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount taught worshipers, this was in 21, taught worshipers this week that Jews will indeed build a new temple in Jerusalem dedicated to the devil. So when you say your enemies want to worship the devil where our holy prophet ascended to heaven, you're not going to garner any favors. You're going to make them mad. And you're going to rally the troops, as it were, kind of get them lathered up. And so it says, the children of Israel will be forced, they will not concede. They'll be forced to change their plans to build the temple inside the structure of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. We'll have to build it outside of the mosque. Temple of heresy to worship the devil, said Sheikh Khalid al-Maghrabi in his lesson on Islam, which he teaches twice a week at the mosque. So the reason for this devil worship is because the Antichrist won't appear unless his temple is built and the devil is worshipped there. At the end of days, we will follow the Jews everywhere. They will not escape us. They will not be able to escape us. The rock and tree will speak according to the hadith and the prophet. And it is a reliable promise from the prophet, according to which the tree and the rock will speak and say, O Muslim, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him. The children of Israel will all be exterminated. The Antichrist will be killed, and the Muslims will live in comfort for a long time. This is a quote from this teacher who teaches at this mosque. So, animosity. There's no, hey, we should shake hands. Okay, we're seeing this chaos happening. Okay, so again, this is the area they're fighting over. It is what it is. I mean, it seems crazy. Like, go find another country. Go take over Turkey, right? It's good tasting food in Turkey. A lot of turkey. Make you sleepy. But still, like, go find somewhere else. But these are holy sites. And the passion behind both sides for this area is strong. And I think it's all coming to a head. I think we're seeing some incredible prophetical times happening, thus making it even more important to do what we need to do to be serving God, to be putting Him first in everything we do, because we don't want to be caught flat-footed when this stuff happens. Got to be on guard, right? What did He tell His apostles to do? 2 things. What did He say? Watch and pray. Okay? Keep an eye on stuff and just pray. Look up, for your redemption draws near. So even more important as we see these things happen, to consider these things, to be watching and praying as we're told to do for these things. Any questions on this? We threw a lot tonight, all right? There's a lot of stuff here, but hopefully it's relevant. If you're watching the news, you're seeing this. You're seeing this conflict. What are these guys battling over? There it is. Okay? This is a major part of it. If Islam backed away and said, it's yours, that temple would be up so fast. That temple would be up fast. Real fast. And everything would be once again ordered. The feasts, the sacrifices, all the instruments. I mean, God was detailed in what He wanted as far as service. It's all coming back. They're grabbing that Torah, they're memorizing it, they're getting it ready. As we saw in our timeline. They're already practicing. They're already getting ready for it. It's an assumed victory for them. So they're ready for when somebody comes in and says, go for it. And that day's coming. And so that's why we're told to watch and pray.